What if a school principal handed a violin to a black student as punishment, mocking him in front of the whole school, only to unleash a hidden talent that would expose the system, shock an entire town, and rewrite his future forever? Nobody at Seacliff Academy expected the morning assembly to change anything. It was a typical Friday in Monterey, California. The ocean breeze wafted in through the old windows of the auditorium, carrying the salty tang of the sea into the room packed with restless teenagers. Principal Meredith Clarkson, known for her immaculately pressed suits and surgically precise smile, stood on stage behind the mahogany podium, surveying her domain with eyes as cold and polished as the marble floors. At first, nothing seemed unusual, except for one thing. Ezra Bennett, a tall, broad-shouldered black student standing awkwardly at the back of the hall, wasn't seated like the rest of the students. He leaned against the wall, his face taut with discomfort, his left hand absent-mindedly rubbing the base of his spine. Clarkson spotted him immediately, zeroing in like a hawk, spotting a wounded rabbit. Her voice, sharp and biting, cut through the murmurs of the room. "Mr. Bennett," she called, each syllable dripping with disdain, "why are you not seated with your classmates?" Heads turned. Whispers rippled like a dark wave across the auditorium. Ezra straightened slightly, suppressing the wince that threatened to betray him. "My back's been hurting," he said quietly. "It's hard to sit right now, ma'am." Principal Clarkson's lips curled into a slow, deliberate smile. Not the kind of smile that comforted or forgave. No, this was something more sinister. The smile of someone who had just discovered the perfect opportunity to make an example out of a boy she already deemed as a problem. "Rules are rules," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "no exceptions." A beat of silence hung in the air like a suspended guillotine. Then her eyes flicked downward. There, leaning casually against the wall near Ezra's feet, was a violin case, sleek battered, obviously not new. "And what's this?" she demanded, stepping forward. Ezra glanced down. "It's my friend Aisha's," he explained, voice tightening. "I'm just holding it for her." Clarkson's smile widened, shark-like. She reached for the case, lifted it high for the crowd to see. "If you think you're too good to follow our simple rules," she said, each word slicing deeper than the last, "then perhaps you'd like to contribute to our upcoming spring concert. A solo performance, 3 minutes minimum." A stunned silence, then a few giggles, a cough, more whispers. Ezra's heart pounded painfully against his ribs. "I don't play," he said, panic rising. "I don't even know how." "Then I suggest you learn quickly," Clarkson sneered, thrusting the violin into his hands. "Let this be a lesson in humility, Mr. Bennett." The auditorium erupted in cruel laughter. It poured over Ezra like a scalding rain. Some students jeered, others just looked away, pretending not to see his humiliation. Ezra clutched the violin case awkwardly, feeling as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. His cheeks burned, his back ached, and somewhere deep in his gut, an old familiar rage stirred, an ancient thing passed down through generations, born of injustice, too old and too sharp to name. Principal Clarkson's heels clicked away, satisfied. She had put the boy in his place. The rest of the assembly resumed, but for Ezra, the world had already split into a before and an after. This wasn't discipline. This wasn't guidance. This was a public spectacle meant to shame, meant to break. But what nobody realized, not Clarkson, not the students, not even Ezra himself, was that the moment she forced that violin into his hands, she had accidentally lit the fuse to something far larger than humiliation. She had ignited a fire, and once a fire is burning, it doesn't go out quietly. Before we dive deeper into this astonishing story, one that will take you through betrayal, courage, pain, and a triumph no one could have foreseen. Please, if you're moved by powerful true stories like this one, take a moment to subscribe to our channel and tap the notification bell. Your support gives us the motivation to continue bringing you real stories that matter. Now, before we continue, let's pause for a moment and reflect. If you were Ezra, what would you do in this situation? A walk away, accepting the humiliation quietly to avoid bigger trouble. B, accept the challenge and fight to turn the situation into a victory. Comment your answer below with A or B. We can't wait to hear your thoughts. When Ezra Bennett walked out of the Seacliff Academy auditorium that morning, the violin case clutched to his chest like a shield. It felt as if the walls themselves had narrowed to watch him. Every hallway seemed to echo with whispers. Every glance sharpened into a blade. He wasn't the new kid anymore. He was the joke. Everyone was waiting to see. Fail. Ezra didn't go to lunch that day. He found an abandoned stairwell near the library and sat there in the dusty half-light, the case unopened beside him. The absurdity of it all made his hands shake with helpless anger. He had never touched a violin before in his life, and now he had 10 days to prepare a solo performance in front of the entire school, 10 days to somehow transform from a nobody into something no one dared laugh at. The thought was laughable, and yet he couldn't bring himself to walk away. Not this time. That night, the kitchen in their small apartment smelled of lemon cleaner and old books. Ezra sat at the table while his mother, Naomi Bennett, prepared dinner after her nursing shift. She glanced at him with concern but said nothing, waiting for him to speak first. Ezra finally told her everything: the assembly, the violin, the mockery in Clarkson's voice. His mother listened without interruption, her hands slowly coming to a stop over the sink. When he finished, she dried her hands carefully and turned to face him. "You know," she said quietly, "your grandfather once told me, if they try to shame you, take the thing they throw at you and build something so beautiful they can't look away." Ezra didn't answer. His throat was too tight. "You can quit," Naomi added gently. "Nobody would blame you." He stared down at the battered case. Somewhere deep inside, beyond the humiliation and anger, something stubborn flickered, a tiny refusal to back down. "I don't want to quit," he whispered. Naomi smiled, pride and sadness tangled in her eyes. "Then we'll figure it out." Later that night, Ezra met Aisha on their apartment steps. She brought a stack of old music books and a determined glint in her eye. "You're not doing this alone," she said firmly, sitting beside him. "We've got 10 days. That's enough." Ezra laughed bitterly. "Enough for what?" "To embarrass myself slightly less. Enough to make them think twice before they ever try to humiliate you again," Aisha corrected. They opened the violin case together. The instrument inside was worn, its varnish chipped in places, but it still gleamed under the porch light like a challenge. Ezra held it awkwardly, unfamiliar with its balance and weight. "First," Aisha instructed, guiding his hands, "you learn how to hold it like it belongs to you." The first sounds Ezra produced were horrible: scratches, screeches, bursts of noise that made even the street cats run for cover. They laughed. Ezra's first real laugh all day. But then they got serious. They practiced until the porch light burned out, and Naomi had to call them inside. Every spare moment after that became a battle. Ezra woke at dawn to practice before school, hiding in the maintenance closet by the gym, because it was the only place he could be alone. He skipped lunch to run scales in an empty classroom the janitor let him borrow. After school, he and Aisha practiced behind the old science wing where the teachers rarely went. Ezra's fingers blistered and bled. His shoulders ached from holding the violin at the wrong angle. His back throbbed with the constant reminder of the injury that had started it all. Some nights he wanted to throw the violin into the ocean and forget the whole thing, but each time the frustration built too high, he remembered Clarkson's smirk, the laughter of the auditorium, the way even his teachers had looked the other way. This wasn't just about learning to play anymore. It was about reclaiming something they had tried to steal from him. On the fourth day, something shifted. Ezra had been struggling with a simple melody. Aisha had chosen a folk tune easy enough to sound decent even when imperfect. He fumbled through the first few bars again and again, cursing under his breath. "Close your eyes," Aisha said suddenly. "What?" "Close them. Stop thinking about the notes. Just listen. Feel it." Ezra hesitated, then obeyed. He raised the bow, took a deep breath, and played. The sound that came out wasn't perfect, but it was something different, smoother, deeper, more alive. For the first time, the violin didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like an extension of something he hadn't known was inside him. Aisha grinned so wide it looked like her face might split. "You did it. Ez, you're actually playing." From that moment, practice changed. It wasn't just mechanics anymore. Ezra learned to hear the spaces between the notes, to feel the vibrations running through his bones. His progress was uneven, sometimes exhilarating, sometimes heartbreaking, but it was real. By the sixth day, word had spread that Ezra was actually practicing. Some students snickered when they passed him, mimicking violin movements or humming mock symphonies under their breath. Others watched with a curious kind of respect, sensing perhaps that something unexpected was brewing. On the seventh day, Mr. Patel, the chemistry teacher, stopped Ezra in the hallway. "You're doing something brave," he said quietly, handing Ezra a new set of strings wrapped in brown paper. "Most people run when they're cornered. You're building wings." Ezra barely managed to choke out a thank you before rushing away, afraid he might cry. On the eighth day, disaster struck Clarkson, apparently hearing rumors that Ezra wasn't about to fall flat on his face. After all, canceled his access to the empty classroom he had been practicing in. "No unauthorized use of school property," she announced over the intercom with icy cheerfulness. The blow hit harder than Ezra wanted to admit. He spent the lunch period hiding in the stairwell again, violin case unopened at his side, feeling like maybe it was all pointless after all. But that afternoon, as he trudged toward the parking lot, Aisha caught up with him panting. "My cousin works at the music shop downtown," she said breathlessly. "They've got a practice room in the back. Tiny but free if you promise not to touch the Steinway." Ezra stared at her, hope flickering back to life. "Come on," Aisha said, tugging his sleeve. "The fire's still burning. Don't you dare let them put it out." That night, tucked into a cramped, dusty room surrounded by instruments older than Seacliff Academy itself, Ezra practiced until his arms shook and his eyes burned. On the ninth day, Mr. Carter found him. The music teacher had been watching quietly from a distance. He had seen what Clarkson was doing. He had seen the cruelty. "Show me what you've got," Carter said, arms crossed. Ezra, too exhausted and too stubborn to argue, lifted the violin and played. It wasn't perfect. His intonation slipped. His bowing wobbled. But the heart of the music, the raw, aching beauty of it was undeniable. When Ezra finished, Mr. Carter's eyes glistened suspiciously. "You have something," he said simply, "something you can't teach." Without asking permission, Mr. Carter began coaching him after hours, correcting his posture, showing him how to conserve energy to protect his injured back. He didn't waste time on theory. He taught Ezra how to survive the performance, how to make 3 minutes feel like a lifetime of experience. "You don't need to be flawless," Carter said on the eve of the performance. "You need to be unforgettable." That night, as Ezra packed away the violin after one final, grueling practice, he paused. He ran his hand over the scuffed case, feeling the worn leather and splintered wood beneath his fingertips. He thought about the assembly, about the laughter, about the broken chair that had torn into his back. He thought about his father, a man he barely remembered who had always told him, "You're not here just to survive. Boy, you're here to rise." Ezra took a breath that seemed to scrape his lungs raw. Tomorrow he would walk onto that stage, not as the joke they expected, but as the storm they never saw coming. The night of the concert arrived wrapped in a heavy mist that rolled in from the cliffs, swallowing the coastline and painting the small town of Monterey in shades of gray. The street lights flickered against the fog like tiny beacons, and inside the Seacliff Academy auditorium, the air buzzed with something electric, a current of expectation sharpened by cruelty and curiosity alike. Ezra Bennett stood behind the thick velvet curtain, his father's worn violin cradled against his chest. The hum of the gathering crowd seeped through the walls, a low murmur filled with half-muttered bets, hushed snickers, and the rustle of programs being unfolded and scanned. He imagined them searching for his name, waiting to see it printed there to confirm the spectacle they'd been promised. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the cool wood of the violin under his fingertips, the slight unevenness where time had worn away the varnish. It grounded him more than anything else could have. Out there, Principal Clarkson sat front and center, flanked by the school board and a handful of local dignitaries she had practically dragged in to witness Ezra's humiliation firsthand. She was radiant in her victory, her designer suit gleaming under the stage lights. This was her performance too, her showcase of discipline, of order restored. Ezra could feel the weight of it all pressing down on him, the months of being unseen, the casual dismissals, the whispered slurs, the systemic hands pushing him down at every turn. Tonight he wasn't just playing for himself. He was playing for every moment they told him he wasn't enough. Behind him, Mr. Carter placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Remember," he said softly, "play for yourself. Play because the music is yours now. No one can take that from you." Ezra nodded, swallowing against the knot in his throat. The house lights dimmed. Clarkson's heels clicked across the stage as she approached the microphone, her voice syrupy with false warmth. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight we have a very special contribution to our spring concert program," she said, letting the words linger just long enough to drip with condescension. "Please welcome one of our students, Ezra Bennett, who has graciously accepted the opportunity to share his developing talents with us." A polite smattering of applause. The kind of applause you give before a comedian bombs or a toddler trips on stage. Ezra heard the mockery curled inside it. He stepped into the light. For a second, the brightness blinded him, and the enormity of the audience crashed over him like a tidal wave. Hundreds of eyes, expectant, gleaming, waiting for failure. Ezra tightened his grip on the violin. His knees threatened to buckle. His mouth was dry. He could feel his back throbbing where the old injury still lived. A ghost under his skin. Then, somewhere in the blur of faces, he found Naomi Bennett, his mother sitting ramrod straight in the third row, still in her scrubs from the hospital, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes were shining, not with fear, but with fierce pride. Next to her, Aisha leaned forward, her mouth moving soundlessly. "You've got this." Behind them, Mr. Carter gave a single solemn nod. Ezra lifted the violin to his shoulder and began. The first note cracked slightly, a ragged breath of sound, but he pushed through it. His fingers found the strings by muscle memory now built from stolen moments and sleepless nights. He let the opening phrase of meditation from Thais drift out over the audience, hesitant at first like a bird testing its wings. The auditorium stilled. No one laughed. No one whispered. The music grew steadier with each breath. The aching beauty of Massenet's melody wove through the air, wrapping itself around the audience like silk. Ezra's bow moved with a tentative grace, imperfect but deeply human. Every slight tremor, a testament not to weakness but to defiance. He didn't think about Clarkson. He didn't think about the punishment or the humiliation or even the impossible odds stacked against him. He thought about his father, about the photo of him, smiling violin in hand. He thought about the nights when his mother fell asleep at the kitchen table, exhausted from working double shifts to give him a future. He thought about Aisha's stubborn belief in him when he had none left for himself. The music built swelling and falling like the tides outside the academy walls. Ezra swayed slightly with the rhythm, his body remembering the movements before his mind could catch up. And somehow in that spotlight, Ezra was no longer playing a borrowed instrument. He was playing his instrument. When he reached the climax of the piece, a pure soaring high note that seemed to suspend time itself, Ezra closed his eyes. He poured every humiliation, every shove, every whispered insult into that sound. Not with bitterness, but with something stronger, with the strength of surviving. The final note hovered for a moment, fragile and defiant, before fading into silence. Ezra lowered the violin and opened his eyes. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. No clapping, no movement, just stunned, aching quiet. Then someone rose to their feet. It was Mr. Carter, a single pair of hands clapping. Then Aisha, then Naomi. Then, like a slow wave, building momentum, the audience stood their applause rising into something thunderous, undeniable, breathtaking. Ezra stood frozen as the noise washed over him. For the first time in his life, he wasn't invisible. He wasn't dismissed. He wasn't a mistake. He was seen. He was heard. He was enough. Off to the side of the stage, Principal Clarkson sat stiffly in her chair, a brittle smile plastered across her face. Her plan to humiliate Ezra had backfired so spectacularly that the energy in the auditorium now burned with something she couldn't control: admiration, awe, respect. Ezra gave a small bow, not for Clarkson, but for his mother, for Aisha, for Mr. Carter, for himself. As he turned to leave the stage, a voice called out, "Ezra Bennett, wait!" He turned to see an older man in a tailored suit stepping forward from the audience. Dr. Samuel Whitaker, director of the Monterey School of Music, one of the most prestigious institutions on the West Coast. The auditorium held its breath. Dr. Whitaker approached the stage smiling warmly. "I don't usually do this," he said, his voice carrying easily through the hushed room. "But what I just witnessed was extraordinary. With your permission, Ezra, I would like to offer you a full scholarship to our summer youth program. I think you have a future in music, young man. A bright one." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Ezra's mind reeled. He hadn't even dared to dream that far, that big. He looked down at his mother, who was crying openly now, her hands covering her mouth. Aisha had both fists raised in silent triumph. Mr. Carter just smiled, proud and quiet. Ezra took a deep breath, feeling the violin still warm against his palm. "Yes," he said simply. "Thank you." The applause erupted again, louder this time, carrying with it something Ezra had never felt at Seacliff Academy before: belonging. As he walked backstage, the violin still tucked close, Ezra caught a glimpse of Clarkson through the curtains. Her expression was twisted with something that looked almost like fear. The fear of someone realizing that the walls they had built to keep others down were crumbling stone by stone. Ezra didn't smile. He didn't need to. Victory didn't always look like shouting or gloating. Sometimes it looked like standing taller than anyone ever thought you could, and letting them see exactly what they tried so hard not to. That night, as the fog thickened outside and the stars disappeared into the mist, Ezra sat in his bedroom, the violin across his lap. He played soft, half-formed melodies into the darkness, not for an audience, not for recognition, but for himself. Every note whispered a truth he had always known deep down, but had been too afraid to believe. You are not small. You are not broken. You are a force. And no one, no matter how powerful, could ever take that away. The morning after the concert, Seacliff Academy woke up in a different place. The news of Ezra Bennett's performance spread through the town of Monterey like wildfire, faster and hotter than any story in recent memory. Whispers turned into discussions. Discussions turned into arguments. And by the time students flooded back into the Academy's halls on Monday, an undeniable tension crackled in the air. Ezra himself felt it the moment he stepped through the front doors, where before there had been mocking sneers or calculated indifference. Now there were stares, curious, respectful, confused. Some students gave him space, as if he had suddenly become someone unfamiliar, someone they didn't know how to categorize anymore. Others gave him quick, embarrassed nods like they were afraid to look too long to be caught reevaluating everything they had assumed. And maybe Ezra thought grimly that was exactly what needed to happen. He adjusted the strap of his backpack, the violin case swinging lightly against his side. Every movement still felt surreal, as if he were playing a part he hadn't auditioned for, but somehow had been born to perform. When he reached his locker, Aisha was already waiting, leaning casually against the cool metal with a grin that didn't quite mask the relief in her eyes. "You realize you broke the school, right?" she said under her breath, glancing around at the students pretending not to eavesdrop. Ezra chuckled softly. "Good. It needed breaking." She handed him a folded sheet of paper. "You should see this." Ezra unfolded it cautiously. It was a printed memo from Principal Clarkson's office, addressed to all faculty and students, dripping with the kind of forced professionalism that barely concealed her panic. Effective immediately. Seacliff Academy will be conducting a full review of disciplinary practices to ensure all measures align with our values of respect, equity, and educational opportunity. Additionally, anonymous reports of discrimination, harassment, or unfair treatment can now be submitted through the newly established Student Advocacy Program. Ezra reread it twice, feeling something hard and electric ignite in his chest. This wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an admission. It was fear. Clarkson had realized she could no longer keep the old games hidden behind polished hallways and manicured announcements. She was scrambling now, trying to control the narrative before it escaped her grasp completely. And it was too late. Way too late. As the day wore on, the shift became even more obvious. Teachers who once ignored him now offered polite greetings. Students who had never spoken to him before asked timid questions about the violin, about the summer program Dr. Whitaker had mentioned after the concert. Even the security guard at the front desk, who had previously eyed Ezra like a threat, nodded in acknowledgement as he passed. But beneath the surface, Ezra could feel something else moving too, a current of resentment from those who preferred the old order. Some glared, some muttered under their breath, a few even threw casual jabs disguised as jokes. It didn't matter. For the first time, Ezra realized their approval had never been necessary. Midway through the afternoon, Mr. Carter found him eating lunch outside, perched on the low wall near the courtyard where he used to practice in secret. "You're a hard man to catch today," Carter said, sliding a brown paper bag onto the wall next to him. Ezra smirked, trying to stay out of the way. "You can't," Carter said simply. "Not anymore. Whether you like it or not, you're part of the story now." They sat in silence for a moment, the faint salt smell of the ocean drifting up from the cliffs below. "How are you really?" Carter asked. Ezra hesitated, relieved, scared, proud, angry. "All of it, I guess." "Good," Carter said. "Hold on to that, you'll need it." He pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket and handed it to Ezra. Ezra unfolded it, his eyes widening as he realized what it was: a formal offer from the Monterey School of Music's summer program. Tuition waived, full scholarship. The page felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried not just opportunity but a kind of justice. "Congratulations," Carter said, smiling. "You didn't just survive, you changed something." Ezra's throat tightened. "Thank you, Mr. Carter, for everything." Carter shook his head. "Don't thank me. You did the work. You stayed standing when they wanted you to kneel." That evening, as Ezra sat at the kitchen table with his mother, he showed her the offer letter. Naomi Bennett's hands trembled slightly as she traced the words with her fingers. "I always knew," she whispered, "even when you didn't." Ezra swallowed hard. "I'm scared." "You should be," she said softly. "Big dreams are supposed to scare you. That's how you know they're real." They hugged, and for the first time in years, Ezra let himself cry not from pain, but from the overwhelming weight of hope. But while Ezra celebrated quietly at home, forces behind the scenes were already moving against him. Principal Clarkson, humiliated by how public the concert fallout had become, launched a desperate campaign to reframe the story. She met privately with select board members, painting herself as a misunderstood leader simply trying to uplift underprivileged students through creative discipline. She circulated carefully worded statements emphasizing her innovative educational approaches and the unforeseen positive outcomes of her methods. It might have worked. It might have slipped neatly back into the usual bureaucratic whitewashing. But then, someone slipped an anonymous note under Mr. Carter's office door. The paper was simple, handwritten in a neat, careful script. "Check the security footage from room 204 on March 3rd. You'll see what she did." Ezra was sitting in Carter's office when the teacher found the note. They exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between them. The next morning, Mr. Carter requested access to the archived security footage. It took pulling a few strings, reminding the IT manager that the school's own protocols allowed faculty access for student safety concerns. When Carter finally queued up the video, Ezra's stomach twisted into knots. On the screen, grainy but clear, was the day in question. Ezra arriving late to Miss Reynolds' English class, explaining about the broken chair, Reynolds ignoring him, Reynolds shoving the chair against his back hard enough to make him cry out and stagger forward. It was all there. Undeniable, visible, painful. Mr. Carter sat back in his chair, his hands steepled under his chin. "They can't explain this away," he said quietly. Within an hour, copies of the footage had been forwarded to the school board, to Dr. Whitaker, and through an unnamed parent advocate to a journalist from the Monterey Tribune, a rising star known for her fearless education exposés. The silence that had blanketed Seacliff Academy for years was shattered. Public outcry exploded. Parents demanded meetings. Alumni expressed outrage. Advocacy groups issued statements. The Tribune published a searing article titled "When Silence Breaks a Student's Triumph and an Administration's Shame," featuring not only the footage, but interviews with students and staff who confirmed patterns of racial bias and disciplinary injustice stretching back years. Clarkson was summoned before the school board in an emergency session. Ms. Reynolds was immediately placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation, and for the first time since Ezra could remember, the institution that had always seemed invincible was on the defensive. But perhaps the most significant moment came not from the adults scrambling to contain the fallout, but from the students themselves. At lunch that Thursday, a small group gathered in the courtyard holding handmade signs: "Justice for Ezra," "No More Silence," "We Are Seacliff Too." At first it was just a handful, Aisha among them standing tall and unafraid. Then others joined students Ezra barely knew, students who had laughed at him, ignored him, written him off. They came anyway. They stood together, and slowly, inexorably, Seacliff Academy began to change. Mr. Carter found Ezra watching from a distance, the violin case still tucked under his arm. "You started something," he said. Ezra shook his head. "No, they did." Carter smiled. "Maybe, but you lit the match." Later that week, Ezra was called into a special assembly where Dr. Whitaker, Mr. Carter, and several board members formally announced the creation of a new scholarship program at Seacliff Academy, one specifically aimed at nurturing artistic talent among underrepresented students. It would be named the Bennett Initiative. Ezra could hardly believe it, his name carved into the future of the very place that had once tried to break him. As he stood before the assembly, accepting the framed certificate, he spotted Clarkson lurking in the back of the auditorium, her expression tight, her posture rigid. She was no longer the future of Seacliff. Ezra was after the ceremony. As the crowd buzzed around him, offering congratulations and awkward apologies, Ezra stepped outside into the cool sea air. He found Aisha waiting by the cliff's edge, the sky bleeding orange and pink as the sun sank into the Pacific. "You okay?" she asked. Ezra nodded. "Better than okay." They stood in silence for a moment, the wind tangling their hair. "Think you'll miss this place?" Aisha asked finally, glancing back toward the academy. Ezra considered it. "Maybe," he said slowly, "but only because of the people who stayed when it mattered." He turned to her smiling. "People like you." She laughed, punching his shoulder lightly. "Don't get soft on me now, Bennett." He laughed too, the sound carried away on the wind. Far below, the waves crashed against the rocks, relentless, enduring. Just like him, summer at Seacliff Academy rolled in, cloaked in a strange, almost sacred quiet. Gone were the whispered cruelties in the hallways, the smirks exchanged in shadowed corners. Gone was the invisible weight Ezra Bennett had carried every day since setting foot on campus, a constant grinding expectation to fail, to shrink, to vanish. In its place, there was something fragile but undeniable, blooming respect. Not universal, not unconditional, but real. And Ezra wasn't sure he recognized himself in this new world. He moved through the halls now without needing to armor himself with silence. Teachers nodded at him, with something approaching pride. Students who once snickered behind his back now sought him out with hesitant questions, asking about the violin, about music, about resilience, about how you kept standing when everyone wanted you to fall. The transformation wasn't complete. It never would be. Real change, Ezra knew, was slow, messy, stitched together with hope and hard choices. But the seams had started to tear open, and through those fractures, the light was finally beginning to pour in. He spent his last week at Seacliff Academy wrapping up final projects, attending award ceremonies, and quietly preparing for something he still couldn't fully believe was real: the Monterey School of Music summer program. His acceptance had rippled far beyond Monterey. Local papers covered his story with words like inspirational and unprecedented. A scholarship fund had been set up in his name to support future students of color in the arts. And Dr. Whitaker had taken a personal interest in Ezra's future, mentoring him with a gentleness that cut through years of bruised expectations. But beneath all the noise, the applause, the sudden surge of opportunity, Ezra stayed grounded by the simple, stubborn truth that had carried him through this had never been about proving anything to the world. It had always been about finding himself. The night before he was due to leave for the summer program, Ezra sat on the back porch of their modest house in Monterey, the ocean breeze tugging at the edges of his jacket, his violin, his father's violin now restored and loved, rested across his knees. He ran his fingers lightly along the polished wood, feeling the silent hum of potential vibrating under his skin. Inside, his mother was packing a bag of his favorite snacks for the road trip. Aisha had promised to meet them at dawn to see him off. Even Mr. Carter had called earlier to leave a message wishing him luck, reminding him to play with heart, not just hands. Ezra closed his eyes and played softly, letting the notes drift into the night. Not a polished piece, not a practiced scale, just music. Raw, aching honest. He thought about everything that had led him here. The shame, the anger, the humiliation Principal Clarkson had tried to brand into his skin when she forced a violin into his hands as a joke. He thought about that moment, how small he had felt, how the auditorium had blurred into a sea of faces waiting for him to fail, and he thought about how wrong they had all been. The music wound around him, a living thing lifting and carrying everything he couldn't put into words. Every cut, every betrayal, every moment of standing alone, he wasn't playing in spite of what had been done to him. He was playing because of it. What had been meant for harm had become his voice. The next morning, Ezra stood by the curb with his mother and Aisha as the summer sun painted the sky in bright, defiant streaks of gold. "You ready?" his mother asked her, hand warm on his shoulder. Ezra smiled. "More than ready." Aisha handed him a small envelope. "Open it when you get there," she said, grinning mischievously. He hugged them both fiercely, climbed into the passenger seat, and watched as his town, the only home he'd ever known, shrunk in the rearview mirror. It wasn't goodbye. It was a beginning. The Monterey School of Music was nothing like Seacliff Academy. From the moment Ezra stepped onto campus, he could feel it, the buzz of possibility, the wide-open embrace of a place built to nurture dreams, not clip their wings. The practice hall smelled of rosin and polished wood. Students carried their instruments like badges of honor, and everywhere there was music pouring from open windows, drifting down sunlit corridors, seeping into every crack and corner. For the first few days, Ezra felt like an imposter. Most of the students had been playing since childhood, their techniques honed by years of private lessons and summer intensives. They spoke in the fluent shorthand of conservatory kids, tossing around composers' names and musical terms with effortless familiarity. Ezra barely knew how to read a full sheet of music, but Mr. Carter's advice clung to him like a second skin. Play from your heart, not your fear, and so he did. At first awkwardly stumbling through rehearsals, his fingers fumbling, his bow slipping, but every mistake, every misstep he met with stubborn determination. He practiced until his fingertips blistered, until his back screamed, until the sun set behind the hills, and the janitors flicked the lights off in the empty practice rooms. Slowly, something shifted. The other students began to notice. It wasn't just the technical improvement, though, that came to painstakingly note by painstaking note. It was the way Ezra played with a rawness, a sincerity that couldn't be taught. When he lifted the violin, it wasn't about showing off or getting every note perfect. It was about telling the truth. By the end of the second week, he wasn't just catching up. He was standing out. One afternoon, during a workshop on emotional interpretation, the visiting conductor, a stern man known for his brutal critiques, called Ezra up to the front of the masterclass. Ezra's hands shook slightly as he positioned the violin. The conductor nodded curtly. "Play something. Anything." Ezra closed his eyes and began the first few haunting bars of Massenet's meditation. His fingers found the notes by feel, his bow pulling the sorrow and hope out of the strings like thread from a wound. When he finished, the room was so quiet he could hear the blood pounding in his ears. The conductor simply said, "That's music," and moved on. It was the highest praise Ezra could have imagined. From that moment on, the summer blurred into a riot of rehearsals. lessons, friendships forged over shared failures and small victories. Ezra played in ensembles, duets, even stepped into a solo performance during a student recital when the original performer fell ill. Each time he lifted the violin, he felt himself carving out a new space, not just here at Monterey, but inside himself. A space where he didn't have to apologize for existing, where his voice mattered. Near the end of the summer program, Dr. Whitaker visited to check in on him. They met in the airy courtyard of the campus cafe where ivy spilled down the old brick walls and sunlight dappled the stone tables. "You're different," Whitaker said after watching Ezra rehearse, more grounded, more yourself. Ezra smiled, setting down his coffee cup. "It feels different." Whitaker leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. The state education board reviewed everything from Seacliff Academy. Thanks to the evidence, Principal Clarkson won't be returning. Neither will Miss Reynolds. Ezra felt the words settle over him like a weight lifting. Whitaker continued, "But more than that, your story sparked changes across the district. New reporting policies, new funding for the arts, new training requirements for teachers." Ezra blinked, stunned. "I didn't think, I just played a violin." Whitaker's smile was gentle. "You did a lot more than that." When they parted ways, Whitaker handed him a small envelope. Inside was a letter of recommendation, glowing, passionate, a key that could open doors Ezra hadn't even dared to dream about before. At the final showcase concert, Ezra performed again, this time in front of a packed auditorium of students, teachers, families. He played not because he had something to prove, but because he had something to give. Music flowed out of him, filling the room with all the things he had no words for. The sorrow of being underestimated, the rage of injustice, the fragile, stubborn hope that had kept him moving forward even when he thought he couldn't. When he finished, the applause felt like a living thing, lifting him up, carrying him forward. Backstage, as he packed up his violin, Aisha's envelope slipped out of his case. He opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a simple handwritten note. "You were never just what they said you were. You were always more. Keep showing them." Ezra folded the note carefully and tucked it into the lining of his violin case close to his heart. When he returned to Monterey, he wasn't the same boy who had been forced into humiliation at Seacliff Academy's assembly. He was something more, someone stronger, someone who had learned that sometimes the things meant to break you are the very things that forge you into who you are meant to become. Ezra Bennett had found his voice, and he would never be silent again. Reflection and lessons from Ezra Bennett's story. Ezra Bennett's journey was never about a violin. It was never about a performance or a concert. It was never about showing up. The people who had mocked him, belittled him, or tried to erase him. At its heart, Ezra's story was about reclaiming the narrative of his own life, taking something that was meant to shame him and transforming it into a symbol of pride, identity, and resilience. When Principal Clarkson thrust that violin into his hands, it wasn't an invitation. It was a challenge, a cruel joke, a calculated attempt to put Ezra back in his place, a place of invisibility, humiliation, and quiet compliance. She wasn't asking him to rise, she was daring him to fail. But what she and others like her failed to understand was that resilience doesn't flourish in comfort. It's born in the fire. It's forged in the refusal to bend, when every force around you demands submission. Ezra Bennett didn't just refuse to break. He built something beautiful out of the ashes of that cruelty. In those first shaky days of learning, when his fingers fumbled and his back ached and the mocking whispers still rang in his ears, Ezra made a choice many never even realize they have. He chose not to accept the version of himself others tried to hand him. He chose to write his own story. The violin, which had begun as a weapon aimed at his dignity, became a bridge to a father he had barely known, to a legacy he hadn't realized was his to inherit, and to a future he had never dared to imagine. Every late night practice session, every aching joint, every missed note he wrestled with wasn't just about learning music. It was about declaring again and again, I am more than what you think of me. When he stepped onto that stage at Seacliff Academy, standing under the weight of so many eyes expecting his failure, Ezra wasn't just playing for himself. He was playing for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. Every child who had been underestimated because of the color of their skin, the size of their body, or the zip code they came from. And when that first trembling note rose into the silent auditorium, something extraordinary happened. The walls built by cruelty cracked. The audience saw, maybe for the first time, not just the caricature they had been encouraged to believe in, but the living, breathing complexity of a human being refusing to be erased. It wasn't a flawless performance. It was something far rarer. It was real. Ezra's music spoke the truth in a language that needed no translation. You cannot silence what was born to sing. We live in a world where obstacles are inevitable. Hatred, prejudice, and cruelty are realities we can't always shield ourselves from. But Ezra's story shows that these experiences, while painful, do not have the final word. When we choose to confront them with courage and persistence, they can become the very fuel that drives us forward. What others mean for harm can become the forge that sharpens our greatest gifts. Ask yourself, what have you been running from that might actually be the key to your strength? Ezra was not without musical gift before he picked up the violin. That gift lived in him, quietly, waiting for air and sunlight. But without Aisha's support, Mr. Carter's belief and his mother's unconditional love, it might have stayed buried forever. Talent alone is not enough. Opportunity, mentorship, and encouragement are essential. Every child, every person deserves someone who believes in the beauty they carry inside. Ask yourself, who in your life needs you to be that person who believes in them even before they believe in themselves? It's easy to frame Ezra's story as one of individual triumph, and it is. But we must not forget the larger truth. Seacliff Academy's failure wasn't just about a few cruel individuals. It was about an entire system that allowed their behavior to go unchecked for years. Real justice means not only lifting up those who suffer, but also dismantling the systems that made that suffering possible. Because of Ezra's bravery, policy changes happened, training programs improved, barriers cracked. Ask yourself, where in your own communities are there structures that need to be challenged, not just endured? Ezra didn't walk onto that stage a master violinist. He wasn't polished or elite. He was messy, raw, real. And that honesty, not perfection, was what changed everything. Too often we convince ourselves we have to be flawless before we're allowed to speak, to act, to try. But impact is not born from perfection. It's born from courage. Ask yourself, what dream have you been postponing because you thought you weren't ready enough? If this story moved you, if it made you feel something powerful inside, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps fuel more stories like this. Real, raw, inspiring journeys that celebrate courage, resilience, and the refusal to be silenced. And if you feel called to help us keep creating high-quality, meaningful content, we humbly invite you to donate. Every contribution, big or small, goes directly into making more stories that matter, stories that heal and empower. Starting out is never easy, but with your support, we can continue building a community where every voice counts. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing. Together, we are not just telling stories, we are writing a better future.